Hello, my name is Erik Harms, and I'm the chair of the Council of Southeast Asian Studies at Yale University. It is a distinct pleasure to welcome Linh Nguyen to today's virtual discussion of new research by scholars associated with the Yale Council on Southeast Asian Studies. Linh spent the recently concluded academic year with us at Yale on a Frederick Burkhardt Residential Fellowship for recently tenured scholars, run by the American Council on Learned Societies. Before her year with us, Linh was recently promoted to the position of Associate Professor of History at Mount St. Mary College in Newburgh, New York, where she teaches world history, courses in international relations, and a suite of courses on non-Western history, including the history of Asia and the Middle East. Linh is a specialist in the social history of modern Vietnam, focusing on how French colonialism intersected with everyday Vietnamese lives. Her first book, Childbirth, Maternity, and Medical Pluralism in French Colonial Vietnam, 1880 to 1945, is notable for its careful use of both French and Vietnamese archives, and sets new standards for what it means to conduct historical research on colonial Vietnam. The book is a rich study of French medicine and endogenous Vietnamese childbirth practices, viewed through the experiences of Vietnamese women and children. Today, we will discuss the book Linh is now completing on coal mines in colonial Tonkin, the region now known as Northern Vietnam. This book promises to be even more exciting than her first book, because it not only forces us to think in new ways about the interaction of local Vietnamese actors with colonial systems of power, but it combines the history of colonialism with environmental history while showing inter-Asian connections often overlooked in colonial history. Linh, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks, Erik Harms, for giving me this opportunity to speak about my book, and also for having me as a visiting scholar at Yale Councils on Southeast Asian Study. So I have just, in the final stage of completing my book on the history of coal mining in French colonial Vietnam. So the book has a working title as The Coal Frontier, Mining Environment and Empire in Modern Vietnam. So basically, this book explores how coal mining came to dominate and transform the physical, economic, and ethnic landscape of northern Vietnam. Often when we think about coal mining, we think about how the industry has often been associated with the French economic presence in Vietnam, their capitalist investment and technology. But I think coal mining is much more than an act of extraction, because beyond the confines of French mining enterprises, coal mining also gave rise to transnational and regional economic links. It fueled migration, urbanization, and clandestine economic activities. It also radically altered the landscape of northern Vietnam, leaving behind some of Vietnam's most enduring environmental problems. For this book, this book argues that the coal mining industry in colonial Vietnam was not French or European in nature, except in the narrow sense of business organization or capitalist investment. In fact, the industry was built upon the coexistence or competition between different forces, both state and non-state, local and transnational. So in order to depict this, these multi-layer stories, my book pays special attention to the roles of various non-state actors whose voices were often underrepresented in the grand narratives of modern Vietnam, such as the Chinese mining and opium syndicates, Vietnam mine owners, migrant workers, the local ethnic cities, rebels, the communists, and other illiterate populations. So I hope that is just,
Well,
a short summary of what it is about.
it sounds like a really fascinating book that covers a wide range of topics. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about where you came up with the idea for this project, and maybe some of the sources that you I guess, to use a metaphor, you've mined for this particular
Yeah,
topic.
yeah. So I have always been fascinated with the social histories of underrepresented groups in Vietnamese history. So for my first book, which was a history of childbirth and maternity in Vietnam during the colonial period, examines the role of Vietnamese midwives of diverse social and educational backgrounds. And these midwives, they cross the cultural boundaries, and they have built a plural system of maternal and infant care in Vietnam. So with this book on coal mining, I was first curious about the roles of Vietnamese mine workers. Because if you go to Vietnam and you talk about the Vietnamese working class, always they're gonna talk about the mine workers, because in Vietnam, the mine workers are often considered the representative of Vietnamese working class. They was a hero. They was a pioneer in the working class movement in Vietnam. But the thing is that the more I read about the miners, the more I see that they were not such a monolithic or conformed group. And moreover, the workers were just one group of actors at the Vietnamese coal mine. Besides the workers, there are many other voyelist actors that arrive to make a living at these colonial mines. They were the loggers who fell the trees for coal mining enterprises. They were the street vendors, the opium seller, the prostitutes, the rebels, the radical, and the criminals who migrated to the mining towns because of the coal wealth and its large mining workforce. Each of these groups have their own story to tell, and that's why I think a book on coal mining would give voices to these actors, and thus it would contribute to a better understanding of the connection between the coal mining industry and the communities and the people that depended on it.
So what are some of the sources that you use? One of the marks of your research is your ability to move fluidly between Vietnamese and French colonial sources. So I wonder if you could tell some of the historians out there, what are some of the unique sources and archives that you may have been using?
Yeah, so my book draw heavily from archival resources located in Vietnam at the Vietnamese Archival Center #1 and #3, and also I also traveled to France and spent a great deal amount of time working at the French National Archives in Roubaix, the Archive National du Monde du Travail, and also the Archive d'Outre-mer in Aix-en-Provence, and as well as the National Library of France in Paris. So these archival resources provide me with plenty of details about the French mining enterprises, the mining regimes, the labor and security details. But the drawback of of official document is that they were written from the French perspective, and therefore they are biased, and they are not complete. And that's why I will try to make up for this gap in the material with the use of multiple Vietnamese language sources, such as colonial newspapers. The colonial newspaper in the 1930s, they published a great deal of information about the workers, about the mines, and you can learn a lot of things about the miners, cultures, some of the scandals that took place, within this company. And also I also take a look at the stories and the novels written during the colonial time about the Vietnamese miners, about Quảng Yên, the largest mining province in Vietnam. And I'm very lucky to discover Ca Dao Thợ Mỏ. Ca Dao Thợ Mỏ, it is a collection of poems written by anonymous workers about their life and their work at the mines. And these poems offer me with very valuable information about these workers, especially their subcultures, their underground culture, their emotion, their fear, their mystery, and also the little known, gender and class divide within these mining towns and this diverse population. So all these Vietnamese sources help me complement the archival materials, and I think together they bring about a more well-rounded history of the mining region, especially when it comes to the voices of the underrepresented group in this story.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about the Kazao Thermal. Where did you find that source? And
I
maybe later, we could pause and we could dig up one of those
yeah,
poems
yeah.
from your computer and you could read one to us.
Oh,
If
oh,
not,
oh, yeah, yes, yes.
so
These are ca dao thợ mỏ. I found them at the library in Quảng Ninh province. So I traveled, to the mining province, and I came to their library and browsed their collection. And these ca dao thợ mỏ, they was published in the 1970s. So it's a pretty old book, but they were very raw, and it's like nearly 100 pages, and we don't know exactly who was the authors, because it was already anonymous. But if you talk to the miners, the people who work in Quảng Ninh right now, because I also spend time hanging out with these miners and ask them about the ca dao thợ mỏ. Some of them know about certain poem in in this collection, because it was like it passed on through generation, and it's part of their tradition, part of their identity, the way their parents, their grandparents who grew up and worked in Quảng Yên, and it's just a part of the history.
mm,
So I think it is these the ca dao, they they offer me a lot of details about the inner world, the
mm,
inner culture of the mining workforce, many details that were only known by the miners themselves. In this ca dao thợ mỏ, you can see a lot of slang, informal language, the way they speak to each other. And if you are not a miner, there's no way you could understand the
that's
the
fascinating.
expressions. They said their own. I think they have their own codes, their
Yeah.
own language. I think to protect themselves. At that time, the colonial time, and the coding language, to some extent, it helped them to protect themselves against the French surveillance. Because if they want to say something behind the French mic, right, they're going to use the languages, because the French, some of the French, they don't know Vietnamese,
Mm,
and even if they know Vietnamese, they might not be able to understand the slang. you know these languages. So I feel like it's a very interesting, very fascinating, and world that the minor culture, and it tells me a great deal of things that you don't find these details at the archive, or even in the in the newspaper. For example, they talk about women. Often when we think about women, right, the female miners, the female workers, we often think of them as the victims. They endure a very heavy job. They were paid less than the men. But what do these women think about themselves? About their relationship with their husband, and the husband also happened to be the miners, right? That they have a happy life, as a
mm,
woman, as a female workers. If you look at the Vietnamese or document, you no way you could see the thing. But then the Gaza they tell us a great deal about these women. The fact that there was a lot of domestic violence in these mining families, because many of the workers, they were addicted to opium and gambling, and also the very tiny salary, and it's difficult to support a family during that period. And often there was a lot of fight between husband and wife. And also the Gaza also tell us about different kinds of women. Not all women do the same job at the mine. Some are, married. Some are single women. Some alternate between being a female worker and being a clandestine prostitutes. So, and there's some sort of jealousy, some sort of tension between different groups of women at the mine. And I feel like this Gazao turmoil, it exposed the very diverse, the very raw emotional culture of
mm.
the miner. And I hope that it could complement, all the official documents to bring us a fuller picture, of the mining workforce.
That's
Yeah.
fascinating. For those of people listening, Kazao also is a kind of it's a folk form of poetry
Yeah,
and
yeah,
oral
yeah.
form. So in
Yes.
a sense, the Kazao offers a window into the oral poetry.
Yes, yeah, yeah, you're right.
It's a brilliant source.
Yeah,
It reminds me
yeah.
a little bit of what James Scott talks about the hidden transcripts, what
Oh,
you were
oh yeah.
describing, the
Yes.
ways in which,
And and
yeah.
you can see many of these miners, they were migrant workers. So they came from the Delta provinces of Tonkin, like provinces like in Taiping, Nam Định, Ninh Bình. And that's why the poetry form also reflected, the Delta cultures, ca dao lục bát, the lục bát
Hmm.
forms of these ca dao, and also they miss their hometowns, and they use the poetry, this poem, as a way to them to remember where they came from. And that's why you can see a lot of elements about the rice agricultures, in Tonkin. And why do you find this in the mining in the higher land of Tonkin? Because these workers, they were migrant. And also some of these workers were Chinese. So they also talk about Canton. They could talk about, they miss Canton, they miss China. So I think it helps us to see the inner thoughts, the thing that it's very difficult to find these details, from when you spend a lot of time looking at the archives. These are the workers telling us in their own voices, how they live, how they could,
Yeah.
their survival, their happiness, and understand their misery.
It must be really exciting to stumble across a poem like that, to get into the window of a worker's voice. I want to
Yeah.
shift gears and ask you another question. In some of your research, you note that you're enacting a kind of shift in some of your research and moving away from what you call the metropole colony paradigm and colonial history. And I want to ask you what that means. What does it mean? What is the kind of shift that you see your work as in enacting? And you also
Yeah.
mentioned your work as engaging in what you call inter-Asian history. And inter-Asia is a kind of emerging
Yeah.
field in Asian studies. So I wondered if
Yeah.
you could talk a little bit about how you're contributing to this new shift in the way we think about Asian studies and colonial history.
Yes. What I mean as a metropole colony program in colonial history, in that historians often relied on the economic models that focus on the relationship between the metropole and the colony to explain the economic history of colonial Vietnam and other parts of the former colonial world. So according to this metropole colony paradigm, Vietnam's became a global co-exporter thanks to the French investment or technology. Or the Vietnamese were poor because the French extracted natural resources and exploited the Vietnamese workforce. But I think if we focus too much on the linkages between France and Vietnam, we could, obscure or miss the important economic connections that existed between Vietnam and other parts of Asia, particularly China. So in reality, the coal mining companies in French colonial Vietnam exported more than 70% of its most important commodity, coal, to China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. And also during the first 2 decades of mass coal mining, the coal companies relies heavily on the Chinese workers. During these first 2 decades, Chinese workers accounted for the majority of the mining workforce in Vietnam. And moreover, if you look at other parts of Southeast Asia during the colonial time, and even today, you can see that the Chinese merchant and syndicates, they play a crucial role in the economic and trading life of the mining towns, and therefore I think it's important for historians to go beyond the metropole colony connection, to explore, the local, the regional, and especially the trans-Asian network that predated. And also that was also changing, during the age of empire. So that's why I, I think we need to take, instead of these vertical, like structure, France and Vietnam, how about we take a look at the more decentralized, right? The local, the regional, the trans-Asian perspective, because
So
many of the things, okay, come on.
Oh no. So in your recent article in Modern Asian Studies, you describe very carefully these kind of dynamite thievery, I think it is,
Okay.
And it's interesting, through that lens, you show these specific networks of exchange and trading between
Yeah.
Chinese traders and opium
Yes.
sellers. I wonder if you could just describe that a little bit as a kind of paradigm
Yeah.
shifting
Yes. Yeah.
analysis.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of my biggest discoveries in this book is the existence of a very thriving informal economy at the mine. Because when historians write about coal mining, they often focus on the former things like the companies, the export, the production, the technology, the workforce. But then you can see the mining regimes in French colonial Vietnam and in many other parts of the developing world. They are not perfect. There's a lot of loopholes. There's a lot of weaknesses that could be exploited by different groups of actors, and that's why there always existed a shadowy, a clandestine, an illicit economy that evolved around this former mining economy. And my story of criminal activities at the mines, attest to this complexity, So in that in the article on the dynamite and opium transnational economy at the Vietnamese Tonkins, I describe the theft of commodities, and also the connection between the thieves, those who conducted the deeds, and those who go outside the mine, those who bought this commodity. And that's why I discover of an an ecosystem, that bound the Vietnamese worker and their Chinese dealers and syndicates, in the mining towns. So the worker, they stole dynamite. They stole not just dynamite, they stole equipment. They stole a lot of things from these from this company. And why did they steal these things? Of course, for money, and also for opium, right? But then who would provide these workers with opium? The Chinese. And that's why the Chinese was willing to buy this material at a discount, right? Because dynamite is a prohibited material. It was in great demand. And the Chinese, after purchasing this dynamite, they could move it, across the border to Yunnan, China. Why? Because the Chinese needed this dynamite for road construction. And by selling this dynamite to the Chinese, syndicate in Yunnan, the Chinese syndicate in Vietnam could purchase opium from Yunnan, because Yunnan was always one of the biggest opium distribution, in southern China, and they could bring back this opium to Vietnam, and they sell the same opium to the same workers, to the same thieves that sold them these dynamite. So you can see it's an ecosystem, right, that connected the Vietnamese workers, the Chinese dealer, the Chinese syndicate in Yunnan. It's a transnational illicit economy, and they make a lot of money. Tons of dynamite, tons of explosive was stolen from these French mining companies for opium, for cash. And you might ask a question: why? What could the French do? To enable all this, right? So it's about the problem with the labor management at French mining company. The fact that the majority of the Vietnamese workers only work 3 weeks a month, or many work even like just 2 weeks a month, right? They were chronically underpaid and underemployed. So there was always a floating, very float mobile, working population at the mine. And that's why many of these workers, right, with no money, some was addicted heavily to opium. That's why they resorted to illegal acts like theft, to make a living. They were dependent on it because of their addiction, because of their economic misery, and at the same time because of the problem with the French colonial power. The weaknesses, the loopholes that existed within this system, that enable theft and other cheating, other what I call fraudulent activities here. A lot of cheating happen. It's just not about theft. Worker falsify their attendance record. They alter, they alter, the records of their work performance, and not just the worker, their their supervisors, the contractor also try to cheat the system. Right? Because it's not a perfect system. There's a lot of problem with the French management, and that's why you can see a clandestine or shadowy economy and ecosystem like this could exist, and they feed, they nourish, many Vietnamese workers and their collaborators.
That's fascinating. I'm going to ask one more question before we wrap up. There's so many questions to ask, but you mentioned the word ecosystem, and although you're speaking about ecosystem as a metaphor in what you were describing,
yes.
but your work also clearly talks about the natural ecosystem as well. And the study of mines intersects clearly with the study of environmental history. And I wondered if you could tell people a little bit about the story of deforestation that's connected to mining. Oftentimes when we think of mining, we imagine the problem of extracting the coal and the problem with the coal itself. But you tell this interesting story about mass deforestation. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, one substantial part of my book is going to be about, the environmental history of coal mining in Vietnam. And actually, it surprised me that, economic history of coal mining rarely talk about, the environmental aspects of the industry. But I also always believe that, mass scale coal mining, it responded to the physical environment in which it was embedded. So when you talk about economic history, that you don't have to talk about the environment. Why? Because the environment has play a crucial role in the coal mining industry. It was not just about about the forest. Of course the forest is important, but also the land, the fact that why landslide and also erosion, and also other things like flooding, why these natural occurrences happen so frequently at the coal mine in Tonkin. And there was a time that many mines had to shut down their operation because of the devastating consequences of landslide and avalanche. And why? You need to ask that question, and that's why I try to find answer to to this question by looking at different factors. Here, of course, you had to look at the factor of technology, because technology and the environment also has like some relationship here. At the same time, to take a look at deforestation, the fact that coal mining companies need a lot of mine timber. They need huge mine prop to show up their underground tunnels, and that's why. And it was estimated that for 1 tons of coal, you would need, at least, to cut down at least 2 tree. You need to cut out 2 tree in order to extract 1 tons of coal. And given the fact that the coal mining industry in Vietnam in the 1920s and the 1930s, every year, right, they produce, from 1.5 million to like, 2.5 million tons of coal, and that's me at least more than 1 million trees could have to be cut down in Vietnam for every single year to support these coal extraction. And that's why one important part of my book is to find out the what caused deforestation, who did it, who cut down the trees. Right? Was that the coal mining company? They wanted to cut out the tree, but would they want to do it? Because if they want to do it, they're gonna have to, to face the administration, the government, the French colonial government, because they have certain environmental rules. So how would you want to have a lot of tree, right? A lot of timber without violating environmental regulation? That's that's a big question, right? And that's why, again, with this book, you can see the deforestation. I also see deforestation is like a clandestine, an illicit, network here with Vietnamese, with a French mining company paying illicit loggers to cut down the tree, so that they could purchase these mine timber from these illegal logger at a discount. And by buying these timber from these loggers, they could circumvent the government surveillance or regulation. So so that's why again you can see an illicit networks here that was mutually beneficial for both Vietnamese forest dependent communities. These loggers, these Dao and Vietnamese loggers, they made money by felling the trees for the coal mining company. And these coal mining company, they also benefited from this because they can pay less money for this illicit, for this contraband, timber. And at the same time, they could avoid environmental regulation. So I think that is pretty interesting aspect of deforestation. It's not just an act of cutting down the tree, and as you can see, it also the social, the economic aspect of that. Why did a minority, ethnic minority like the Mat, choose to cut down the forest for the French mining company, even though the Zhao themselves, they were displaced from their villages because of the mining expansion. You can see as a very adverse impact of environmental regulation, and also of, capitalist economic development. Mining expansion means people have to move out of their community, giving the land to these mining companies. And then what could they do without the forest? Of course, they're gonna do something, something that the government didn't want to see. They're gonna cut down the tree for whoever whoever could pay them. And here you can see the French, mining company, right? They could pay these displaced ethnic group to do the deeds for them. They made money by exploiting this group, but at the same time, these ethnic groups, they also benefited. They benefited in some way through these environmental degrade, violations. So that's one of the story that I want to tell in this book.
Thank you, Lynn. This book just seems like such a fascinating, multifaceted exploration of so many different disciplines, crossing so many fields, using this fascinating story of Vietnamese coal mines really to dig in to so many different angles. I just want to thank you for your time talking about the book today, but I also want to thank you for your time with us over the past year as this a visiting fellow through the ACLS program, and for sharing all your knowledge and your wealth of understanding about Vietnam with us at the Council on Southeast Asian Studies at Yale. So I just wanted to end by thanking you for that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, and Erik Harms for for a wonderful year at Yale. I had a great time. I have an opportunity to meet other scholars on Southeast Asia. I have great exchanges with these scholars, and Yale provide me with valuable resources on for me to conduct my research on Vietnam. Thank you so much for hosting me, and I hope to be able to come back to Yale for some, of course, for attending other seminar and perhaps to talk about my book in the future.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.